Good morning and welcome to the Big Breakfast. Oh, Big Breakfast, sorry. Full Scottish breakfast. Bit flustered this morning because there's only two of us in the studio. Our presenter Corey has come down with one of the many lurgies, and so I'm going to be answering my own questions and also speaking to my fellow guest this morning, Chris Stevens, MP for Glasgow South. Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Glasgow South West, indeed.
Glasgow South West, sorry.
So, yeah.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you.
Getting here this morning was a bit tricky. The men's 10K is on in Glasgow, which made the underground somewhat fragrant. Have you ever been tempted to run?
No, not to run. Lots of walking, but not running.
Okay. Well, talking about running, obviously the big race at the moment that we're facing is the Tory leadership competition. Down to 6 now. Mm-hmm. Boris clearly out in front. What's your take on it?
Well, it's quite fascinating when you're down there and you see Conservative MPs conspiring in and out of cupboards, emerging, discussing the whole issue. Certainly those who backed the contenders have fallen obviously have decisions to make, but it seems quite clear that we are, unless there are some exceptional circumstance takes place, that we're going to be heading towards a Boris Johnson premiership. And I think that should scare not just people in Scotland, across the UK and the world. If we could imagine Donald Trump and Boris Johnson discussing the codes and the nuclear button.
Yeah. Well, it's
fills
interesting.
Me with dread. Fills me with absolute, complete and utter dread, but it certainly looks like Boris Johnson is emerging as not just a front runner, but a very strong front runner.
Interesting talking about the nuclear codes, because Rory Stewart, who's standing against him, who has a bit of a military background, has said outstandingly for someone in the Tory party that Boris Johnson shouldn't be in charge of the nuclear codes. Now, you hear them say that often about leaders of the Labour Party.
Sure.
Don't often hear them saying it about their own. I'm not often tempted to retweet Max Hastings, but my favourite quote of the week was from Max Hastings, who of course was Boris's employer for 7 years, when he said he wouldn't trust Boris to tell him if it was Monday or Tuesday, which yes. I thought was pretty strong. Your colleague Ian Blackford has said that if Boris does become Prime Minister, then he would seek to try and trigger a no confidence vote. And Ken Clarke has come out just a couple of days ago to say that he thinks if Boris becomes Prime Minister, it will lead to a general election. Sitting down in Westminster, do you think that's likely to happen?
Well, I think it's a very strong possibility. Certainly, it is ridiculous that it's the Tory membership who's going to decide the next Prime Minister without then a test of the public.
Absolutely.
We are, of course, reading some newspaper articles today that it's going to try and force other people to stand down as leadership candidates, which means that Boris would get it without it going to the Tory members, the same way that Theresa May managed to get it. But certainly there should be a public test. And certainly we shouldn't fear a general election. I think that the party is strong at the moment with very good, strong European elections.
Well, it's predicted we might take 57.
It is. I mean, I've seen the range between 56 and 58. I think so. I think that certainly the public need to test. I think either through a general election or through some form of referendum in terms of Brexit, because I think that what's now clear is that many of the front runners for the Conservative Party leadership want the UK to head towards some sort of no-deal exit, and I think that the economic catastrophe that could come from that scares me, and it scares a lot of people out there who are watching.
Rory Stewart is an interesting character, not likely, I think, to get anywhere near being on the ballot, but seems to be picking up a general public affection. His campaigning style is very populist, it's very of the people, going out and meeting people. He's a great walker, a bit like yourself there, Chris. He famously walked across Afghanistan.
Well, I think he's a better walker than me, to be honest. I think,
well, he has walked across Afghanistan, which I'm guessing you haven't done.
Yes.
But people are saying that he might be someone who could help get the Tory party re-elected, whereas Boris will alienate people. And I'm wondering, he hasn't said, I don't think, one way or the other, whether he would serve in a Boris Johnson cabinet, but I suspect that is there a chance that if people think he might take the public with them if there was to be a general election, that might persuade some of his parliamentary colleagues to put him onto the ballot.
Rory Stewart said this morning on the MAR programme he wouldn't serve in a Boris Johnson cabinet, so that was in the last hour. But then people have said these things before.
David Mundell,
David Mundell, I think, is now all over the place. He's now he seems to have the opposite of the Midas touch. He's now backing Michael Gove, which I'm sure Michael Gove will be less than happy at, given David's track record on these things. I think Rory Stewart's campaign seems to be to appeal to those who are not conservative rather than those who are conservative. There seems to be two schools of thought. I'm not sure if he was, but I think he was probably New Labour, which probably explains a lot. But there seems to be two schools of thought as to who could win a general election, elbow Nigel Farage out the road, and who can take on Corbyn. There's not really been much discussion about Scotland at all, apart from the usual that they oppose independence. Boris Johnson's appeal appears to be that he can take on Farage, elbow him out the road, and then focus on a general election. What I thought was interesting about Rory Stewart in his interview this morning with Andrew Marr was he was talking about a Citizens' Assembly, and that was fascinating given that the SNP's talking about a Citizens' Assembly. There's been a Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, so it's fascinating that Rory's now picked that up in terms of a way of trying to get through the whole Brexit issue is to punt that to a Citizens' Assembly.
Yeah, I saw that, because he's not for a second vote, he's not for a confirmatory vote. I think 99 people was what he was suggesting in the Citizens' Assembly. Not much detail on how that would actually work. Let's stay on Boris Johnson then just for a minute, because obviously one of the things that we know about him is he's a man who speaks before he's engaged his brain. When he was Foreign Secretary, which was only for 2 years, he did more damage as Foreign Secretary in 2 years than many a Foreign Secretary has done. And I don't want to give the man any more publicity by repeating some of the appalling things he said about people. But one of the most damaging things he said when he was Foreign Secretary, which is now back in the headlines, was his comments about Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British Iranian woman who is in prison in Iran, was arrested 3 years ago when she was on holiday visiting her family. The Iranian government claimed she was spying. She is a journalist, and Boris Johnson said it was outrageous she'd been arrested. After all, she was only over there teaching journalism, which of course she wasn't doing.
Yes.
And the Iranian government pounced on that immediately and said that goes to prove that she's trying to bring down the regime. Now that the woman is on her third hunger strike, her husband has joined her on the hunger strike. He's outside the Iranian embassy because he doesn't want this to fall off the press. What are your worries about what would happen to foreign policy if Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, leaving aside what would happen to this poor woman who might end up languishing in an Iranian jail? What do you think his main foreign policy agenda would be if he was Prime Minister?
Well, he should have been sacked for that particular instance. I think a stronger Prime Minister would have sacked him for that. I just think that it's not just an issue with Boris Johnson, but I think that within the Conservative Party and the Leave case and the Brexit case seems to be an inward-looking, narrow nationalist view of the world, thinking there's an empire there. And, I hear them at Westminster who think they can force the Republic of Ireland out the European Union and if they believe that, and if they believe that, they're clueless. Well, I think to rejoin the UK would be their ultimate goal, but I mean that is just completely and utterly daft. But it is a view that they think there's an empire out there who are willing to come back, and that sort of view that comes across in many in the Brexit case. I think that Boris Johnson is probably more devious than people think. He may not be clever. He may make a lot of mistakes. He may be. He says clearly a lot of things that are offensive, but I think he's a very devious individual as well, and I think that his past has obviously shown that. I do fear Boris Johnson premiership, what it means for international relations.
Well,
with the sort of incident that you talked about.
Things are ramping up in that part of the world anyway. Yep. So the attacks on the ships in the Gulf, which Saudi are claiming is Iran, Trump has waded in and said it's got Iran all over it. Could we be in a position, and Saudi have also said that they will not stand for any more of that they will take action. Do you see a position where perhaps America would join in with their great pals, the Saudis, to have some kind of military conflict against Iran? And do you think a Boris Johnson premiership would lead us into another war in that part of the world?
Well, that could happen. Of course, it would be a mistake. Every Western intervention in the Middle East has ended up making the situation worse. Boris Johnson sort of would be the sort of person who would simultaneously declare war on 3 different countries at the one time. That's the sort of individual he would be. But I think that there's all sorts of diplomatic disasters that could come about as a result of Boris Johnson premiership. And I think obviously this view that he's the one who could just go to the EU and suddenly unravel a deal, I think is for the birds as well.
Yeah, well, the EU have been clear. There is no more negotiation.
Yes.
This is the deal. You pass it or you don't, and that's the end of it. And actually, despite the fact the EU have come out again very strongly, I understand they've also stood down the negotiating team. So as far as they're concerned, they're on their holidays, thanks very much. Yeah. None of the Conservative contenders seem to have addressed that at all. They're just ignoring that. They're just fingers in their ears, la, la, la.
Yes.
Back to the issue about Sir Gary Ratcliffe. Obviously, even after his disastrous intervention, none of the Home Secretaries that have come after him have done any more to support him. Just this morning, Hunt saying it's terribly sad and we mustn't let it happen, but no one is prepared to do anything about it. How do you think this is going to end for this woman? Will Iran have a conscience and let her go? I mean, she did say that she would be prepared to end her life before her daughter was 5, and her daughter passed her 5th birthday just recently.
Yeah, well, I think it would be dangerous to speculate the future on that, but obviously there's now a hunger strike with herself and her husband. Interestingly, following hunger strikes with Kurdish activists in Turkey and in the UK. So, I mean, certainly I would hope that diplomatic efforts were ramped up to ensure that she's released and sent back to the UK.
I'm not getting a huge impression that the public are terribly engaged with the story, though. It's getting coverage, a lot of coverage yesterday, but it's not something I hear people talking about. I'm not hearing people...
Well, I think people were talking about it at the time. I think it's one of these issues where people talk about it at the time, but as time elapses, other things take place, there's other issues dominating the media.
That's the whole point, isn't it? The idea is let's keep Brexit on the front page, keep Tory leadership on the front page.
So I mean, I would certainly hope that there would be a resolution where there could be a return to the UK and she could be reunited with her family.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about something a bit closer to home, and I know this is something that is particularly important to you because you've asked a question in the House about it this week, and that is Serco, the housing provider for people on asylum support, announcing that they're going to go ahead with the key change plan to lock out and evict asylum seekers who they claim are appeal exhausted. This was something they had planned to do from last year. It was taken to the courts, it was stopped, and only I think a couple of months ago the courts ruled that in fact they had every right to do that. So tell us a little bit about what you...
Well, let's take it from the start then. Last year, Serco had announced that they wanted to enforce lock change evictions for one reason only, for their profit. This is a contract which they initially had made a loss, had then made a small profit, and they wanted to increase the profit for their shareholders. That's what this is about. And I think that it's a classic example of how outsourcing does not work. And I don't believe you can outsource a service such as this when you're providing services to asylum seekers. It used to be the local authorities were providing that service, and I think we should get back to that.
But Glasgow weren't even allowed to take part in the bid.
Well, that's right.
They were locked out of the bid. So
they basically made it impossible for local authorities to submit a tender, because the local authority, Glasgow, did want to be in a position where they wanted to bid for that. But you're right, they were locked out. But going back to the lock change evictions, because of the public pressure and because Mike Daly at the Govan Law Centre had submitted a Court of Session bid on behalf of 2 of my constituents. We then had the decision in April, which was actually a mixed decision, because some of what Serco were arguing that they were somehow exempt from the Human Rights Act because we're a private sector company. The judge just completely said that was wrong because it is a public contract. An appeal's been lodged in the inner house of the Court of Session, and I'm absolutely staggered that this week that Serco had put out a press release where they don't appear to have contacted any local authorities before putting out that press release, but they'd contacted the Home Office on the Tuesday for Wednesday when the press release became public, that they were going ahead with lock change evictions. Now, what I've discovered in the last couple of days is I had a constituent come to me in my surgery yesterday at Ibrox Library who had a letter that was 3 weeks old saying that she was going to be subjected to a lock change eviction. So the Serco spin, saying that they were not going to press ahead with lock change evictions and they would make a statement further on, I think suggests to me they've been less than truthful. Because if I have a constituent who's got a 3-week-old letter, then I'm going to be asking them questions as to
that would
how
suggest
long.
Not that it's going to happen this week to them, because I thought there was 21
Well, it
days
could
notice
happen.
they had
Well,
to give.
it could happen to them. I mean, I'm obviously discussing this with the Home Office. I've raised, as you had said, my utilised the business questions on Thursday, saying we really need a debate on this. This is a company who've been found time and time again not to be telling the truth about this contract and about their tactics. They really need to be asked why they're ignoring someone's right to appeal to the inner house of the Court of Session to challenge this policy. But that's only the start of it. I think the biggest thing for me, and what I will not forgive them for doing, is labelling people as failed who are not failed.
Absolutely.
They claim there are 300 failed asylum seekers. There are not 300 failed asylum seekers.
I believe that some of the people have got refugee status or other leave to remain.
Some will have leave to remain, some will have refugee status. Some will be between either submitting a fresh claim through their solicitor or they're appealing a decision. Now, to label people as failed, I think is completely irresponsible.
Well, it's done deliberately, isn't it?
It's done deliberately to ramp up. Well, it's done deliberately to ramp up opinion and to try and suggest that they're the ones who are being set upon and that they're the victims because they are
that's
making
what the
profits.
spokesperson said when I heard her on Friday use exactly that sort of terminology. So I was talking to the Scottish Refugee Council about this on Friday. They're running weekly legal surgeries at the moment, and also I think we have to give a shout out to Positive Action Housing, who are doing outstanding work. And it might be an idea, I think, if we can get on Broadcasting Scotland's website the Scottish Refugee Council helpline number and Positive Action Housing, because it's got lots of fantastic information about how people who think they're at risk can help, and also Positive Action Housing are asking for people in Glasgow who've got a spare room to step up and make that available for short term, because people are going to be out on the street. But when I was asking Scottish Refugee Council if they had any idea who exactly was on this list, of course they don't. But they did point out that the people that they thought were going to be victims of this when they discussed this originally, a huge percentage of them have now moved on to something else. They've either gone into Section 4 support, so they're being rehoused somewhere else and they're getting Section 4 support, or they've had a fresh claim set up, or they've had a successful appeal and they've got status. So it would suggest that this cohort will be in the same boat, and they reckon it could be as many as a third of the 300 could actually have some kind of status anyway, which of course gives them housing rights.
Yes. So
the question has to then be, what's Glasgow City Council doing about providing emergency accommodation? Because obviously street homelessness in Glasgow is now is endemic. I mean, it's worse than it's ever been. You can't walk along round about the Tron Gate, the part of the city that I live in, Sauchiehall Street. The number of street homeless is increasing. So what's gone wrong with housing and housing support in this city, and what are Glasgow City Council doing about trying to find emergency accommodation? So we know with the clients that we work with that something like 90% of people, when they get granted leave to remain, are put into emergency accommodation. And that could be homeless hostels, it could be, at a time it was hotels. The Ibis Hotel on Paisley Road West at one point, as you're probably aware, was just full of people who'd got granted leave to remain. People in that situation find it very difficult to get work because they don't have a permanent address. If you're staying in a homeless hostel and then you get offered a job that's low paid, you can't afford to stay in the homeless hostel because it's too expensive and you lose that bit of your housing benefit. So this is just flagging up a situation which is bad for the city anyway.
No, that's right. But
have you had any discussions with Glasgow City Council
I've
about
I've had some discussions with Jane Layden. I mean, I think, to be fair to the council, this really broke to them on Wednesday. And it was it was a surprise to everyone because MPs have not been officially told in correspondence from Serco that this was happening. But I think there's another issue which no one's from the Home Office has yet been able to answer for me. Is if the lease that asylum seeker has on our property, if the lease is on behalf of Serco, it's not just on behalf of Serco, it's on behalf of the Home Office.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a contract changes from the subcontractor, in this case Serco, will transfer in September to the Mears Group, then why doesn't the lease just change from Serco to the Mears Group? Because it seems to me it's sensible that the Mears Group are taking over the accommodation contract, and that what really should happen then is just a change of name. No one's been able to answer that question.
And that's not what's going to happen.
And that looks like that's not what's going to happen, because what Serco are saying is that the reason that they are removing asylum seekers from their property is so they can hand the keys to the landlord. Now, in many cases, it's private sector landlords, it's private landlords. There are some housing association homes, but it's mainly private landlords. So they're going to remove individuals and possibly throw them in the streets, as you said, Maggie, and hand the keys back to the landlord. Now, I just don't understand that. I don't understand why this would just simply be a simple transfer of the lease. And are they going to be the
same flats at the Mears Group, the same accommodation that the Mears Group is going to take over?
Well, that's now a question as well.
Presumably.
I mean, that is now a question as well, because I think that there has to be some comment from the Home Office and potentially the Mears Group as the right taker on this contract as to what kind of accommodation are they going to be providing.
And how much we've
seen stories in the press in the past, some of them Glasgow South West constituents, of the completely disgraceful conditions that asylum seekers have been put in that would not pass Scottish housing law.
The suggestions that we're going to convert old industrial units into accommodation at one point.
That's right. We've heard that. We've heard there's been overcrowding in some of the hotel accommodation. That's come up before. We've had people get into flats. There's blood on walls. There's various things. So there are many questions, and that's why my view is that as members of Parliament we need to use every parliamentary device available to us now to try and get answers to these questions, and to force the Home Office to instruct Serco to halt these lock-style change evictions, particularly when the law in this is still unclear.
Especially when there's judicial reviews and appeals going through. Exactly.
That's what should take place.
The other issue, two things that also occurred to me. So it's my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer so I could be wrong, but it's my understanding that in Scotland the only people who have the right to enter a house to deal with debt or sequester belongings are sheriff's officers.
Yes.
And sheriff officers will not be involved in this process, nor will the police.
Yep.
So I'm wondering where the legal competency is to allow people from Serco to actually enter the houses.
Well, that's one of the tests, Maggie. That's one of the tests. Because what is happening, and what Positive Action Housing are saying, what Scottish Refugee Council are saying, what Government Community Project are saying, and many other organisations are saying, is that there are employees of Serco who are getting into these properties, very aggressively telling people to leave, very aggressive, acting in a very aggressive manner towards asylum seekers, that they do feel very uncomfortable, they feel scared, and I'm glad actually that the police are not being involved, because for some people when they see a man in a uniform,
exactly
that means something completely different to them than it would to someone who's
yes, because that's a man in uniform that's put them where they are.
Yes.
And also, I can remember a number of years ago when there was evictions were kind of back on the cards, and it actually after Glasgow lost the housing contract and it became owned by private companies, and therefore things became much harder. There was instances of people wanting to evict families, but the Children's Scotland Act trumped that bit of legislation. I'm sorry to use that word.
Yes.
And I think I'm right, if you're a day before your 19th birthday in Scotland, you're deemed to be a child. So Circle have said they won't evict families, but we can't really be sure of that, can we? We could still see children taken out of their homes. And surely that has to be stopped, because that would be absolutely
well, that needs to be
stopped.
I mean, that needs to be stopped, absolutely. There are just so many unanswered questions now around this pressure.
I suppose it's just...
And I think there's an arrogance from Circle, though, that really needs to be challenged, that they think they can do this and they're playing the victim, as we've agreed. I think that we're a more humane society than what Circle think.
Well, you would think so, but in terms of immigration and migration, they're clearly not. A hostile environment,
yep.
An absolute stated aim of Theresa May,
yes.
as long ago as 2002.
Yeah.
This is just another example of the hostile environment.
Well, it's also an example of right-wing politics, where they try and channel people's anger and energies into blaming someone who's worse off than them.
The othering people.
Than it is about government decisions. And you see that with the rhetoric around that these are individuals who have failed, that they're responsible. Claims that they're on benefits, which is just a nonsense. They're not on benefits. They're on a state support payment of £37 a week. To put that in context, when I started working at the council as a trainee, a YTS, in 1990, I was getting £35 a week.
Yeah.
So that just puts it into perspective.
Yeah, 37 years ago, and they're still living on exactly the same.
But
that hostile environment is still is evident, not just to do with asylum seekers, but the whole issue of migrants generally, and that's what's fed the whole Brexit thing. So it was interesting, was it not, to hear Ruth Davidson come out recently and say it was absolutely essential that the Westminster government now looked at immigration for Scotland differently, which of course is something the SNP have been saying for a while. We've published a white paper on the Scottish visa, and I was at a conference in London recently where that was presented to a number of agencies and human rights lawyers from across the UK, and it got a tremendous reception. The people from the Home Office who were at the back of the room looked less pleased. Yep. And when I specifically asked what the Home Office response had been, the answer was couched in diplomatic terms, but clearly the Home Office are not interested in this in the least. But suddenly now Ruth Davidson's on the bandwagon, for different reasons clearly, she's supporting it. Do you think there is any chance that once the Tory leadership contest is settled, that there'll be any way that Scotland will have a different approach to immigration, have different rules than the rest of the UK?
The only way that'll happen is through independence. I just don't see that happening. You've seen, and I've witnessed this nasty bunch of 13 Scottish Tory MPs who really only down there to slag off the SNP. They don't seem to have much thoughts about any other issues. It's all anti-SNP rhetoric at every opportunity they get, who have vehemently argued against the devolution of immigration. Vehemently argued against the devolution of immigration policy to go to the Scottish Parliament. So I really don't see that happening, and I don't see Boris Johnson or whoever was to take over doing that. The only way to get a sensible immigration policy, in my view, is through independence.
Well, I was not going to disagree with you there. But thinking about what's going to happen to, let's say, the soft fruit industry in Scotland once migrants leave. Yep. Someone was asking me about this yesterday. I was at an event for sort of Glasgow Welcomes Refugees event as part of the Refugee Festival, at a time when actually making these connections and just showing that there is a different approach to refugees is tremendously important. And the conversations were all about what was going to happen around the Circle situation, and more widely, what did I think, not that I've got any particular knowledge on this, was going to happen long term about asylum seekers coming to the UK, or indeed what's going to happen with refugees. One of the things that worries me, because this was part of Theresa May's agenda when she was Home Secretary, She was very much of the view that we should spend more time investing in relocation schemes, the sort of scheme we have just now with the Syrians who were chosen in the camps to come to the UK. That was as a result of the mass movement of Syrians across Europe. They weren't prepared to take in any of the Syrians who'd got to Europe. They would take the good refugees that had stayed put and behaved themselves nicely in the camps in Jordan, and Britain has committed to taking 20,000 over 5 years. Scotland's taken more than its fair share, and teething problems in the beginning, but generally, at least in Scotland, the system is working quite well. There was a suggestion that we would unsign from the UNCHR. We would no longer allow asylum seekers to claim asylum by arriving in the UK, that the only people who we would let in would be through relocation schemes. Now, it works in places like Australia and Canada and America, who are actually quite far away from the theatres of war, and therefore people are less likely to just turn up. The last time there was any mass turning up on Australia's doorstep was during the Vietnamese boat people in the situation in the late 70s, early 80s. Obviously, we are 22 miles or so from the rest of Europe across the Channel. That's not feasible. Do you think that might be something that the government would push for? So a further break in people's human right to claim asylum?
Well, the Conservative Party is capable of anything as far as I'm concerned. There are Conservative MPs who argue that position, that they want Australian-style immigration policy. I think you've highlighted the difficulties around that just with basic geography. I think we have a duty and responsibility to look after our fellow human beings, and particularly in view of the fact that it's the Western world who's responsible for many of the conflicts and the situations as they're arising in the Middle East.
Yeah, I remember being at a conference in Sweden at the height of the Iraq War, and Sweden took a huge number of Iraqi refugees in. I mean, by far the biggest in Europe. And I remember being at a conference where their foreign secretary effectively stood up and said, "We didn't start the war, come on Britain, get the finger out and do your bit." And of course we never ever have. So, okay, so you mentioned independence, it's what we're all hoping for. Yesterday, Oban, I think, 7,000.
Well, before we mention Oban, I just want to take an opportunity to, we've explored our views on this particular issue. And I think the public do see and support asylum seekers and their rights and refugee rights. And I was delighted that one of our churches in Glasgow South West, St Lady St George's, managed to get within 1 week 387 signatures in support of an asylum seeker family in my constituency. So that goes to show you that there are and there is out there support for asylum seeker rights and refugee rights.
I would agree, and I work with companies every day who are prepared to give people with a refugee background an opportunity to get back into work, and I would agree there is that general feeling, and whether that's to do with the Scottish diaspora, whether it's to do with the fact that we've seen our own people over the generations leave the shores, or whether it's just that we just have a different attitude to people's rights, I don't think we can pin that down. But interestingly enough, there was a public attitude survey done across the UK quite recently.
Yep.
And actually, when you dig into that in any detail, there's not a huge difference in the general Scottish public's view about immigration from the rest of the UK. But I think the difference here in Scotland is it hasn't reached the political agenda. Nobody, apart from a very few right-wing people, are making political capital out of it. Therefore, there's nowhere for the media to go with it. So we have a media which at best is carping on the sidelines, but doesn't really go for the jugular. So I remember 2 years ago when we launched the Refugee Doctors Programme, we were amused, to say the least, that the Daily Mail couldn't find anything bad to say about it. You know, they tried to get us on the money, they tried to get us on the funding, and in the end they just ignored us. And we do play the Daily Mail game at work. You know, you introduce a new service and you say, what are the Daily Mail going to say about that? But even papers who are not particularly supportive of the SNP government and their attitudes to migrants aren't really feeling that there's political capital there that they can milk. And of course we know that the media doesn't reflect public opinion, it shapes public opinion. But I don't know how long that's going to continue. I feel we've got really a short window before somewhere in the political spectrum in Scotland it becomes an issue, in which case I'm not 100% convinced that people in Scotland would remain as open and positive. That's why
I'm not sure about
getting
that.
Control of immigration has been one of the things from independence is so crucial.
Yeah, I mean, the issues around Brexit, and as you were talking about the fruit industry, for example, there's clearly an issue there that particularly European Union migrants, so-called economic migrants, are coming over and doing that sort of work. And if they're not allowed to come over, then there's going to be a problem there. I do think that there's... What fascinated me about the Brexit results is where in areas like London, Glasgow, Edinburgh, multicultural, diverse communities were very much strongly for Remain. In areas where there's less immigration, and immigration is supposed to be a big threat, we're voting Leave.
That's because people aren't exposed to people of other cultures and therefore fear.
Correct.
And therefore that othering of people is easier. But when you think about the percentage of the Scottish population that is from overseas, it's tiny compared to the rest of the UK. So actually you could argue that would make people in Scotland generally more fearful, but it doesn't seem to. And I think some of that is to do with some, especially rural communities, have actually seen it's been migrants arriving that have saved services, that have kept schools open, that have allowed there to be NHS dentists further north in Inverurie, which at one point was the cut-off, and have contributed to communities. And they are seeing they're fearful of what's going to happen if people leave. And I mean, we know the huge impact on the NHS of people leaving. I think we've just signed a contract. Is it 100 Australian nurses have just signed a contract to come over? I think for 2 years to work in the NHS.
Used to be the other way about.
It used to be the other way about. Apparently, they're all looking forward to not roasting in the hot sun. They're all from Western Australia, and we'll see how that works out. Meanwhile, we're trying to get some refugee nurses back into nursing, getting the registration. So there's that's being dealt with in a lot of cases. But I'm just worried that we become complacent about people's attitudes to migration. And I think we said it before, the only way to make sure we've got control is independence. So let's just get on to that for as we into the last third of the programme. So yesterday's march in Oban, I don't know, were you there?
No, I wasn't there. I was addressing a rally in the Buchanan Street steps on the Circle lock change eviction, so I wasn't in Oban.
And I was welcoming
and I had surgeries in the morning.
In Glasgow. Obviously that was a big turnout, and there's a lot of debate about the marches. Do they work, do they not work? What do they indicate? Are they showing an indication of a mood change for independence? I tend to rather look at what people I'm talking to are saying. So in the last 2 weeks, I've had a close family member who was a no voter say, I'm not quite over the line, but I am much more likely to vote yes next time than I ever was. I have a couple of questions, but no, I'm fairly sure the reasons I voted no are gone. I had a friend who was a staunch no supporter, who phoned me up out of the blue 2 weeks ago to tell me he was voting yes, which was very nice. But both of them have an issue which I think we can't ignore. They might be prepared to vote yes, but neither of them are natural, or in one case ever going to be a supporter of either the SNP or the Green Party. If we don't get or we don't manage to have a referendum before the end of the Scottish Parliament, and if there's not a general election in the UK which we can use as yet another mandate, and you have to ask how many mandates do we need, what worries me is there are a lot of people, I think, if a referendum is set in front of them, are going to say, I might have to hold my nose, but we need to do this. And Europe is part of it, and Boris Johnson might be part of it. What worries me is that these are not necessarily people who would vote for parties who would deliver that independence majority in Holyrood. And let's face it, we just need an independence majority in Holyrood. Ruth Davidson's view on what needs to happen is irrelevant. And I'm wondering if that's going to be something that we could become unstuck. And I'm saying to people, well, you know what, maybe in that case you are just going to have to hold your nose at that point and vote for a party you wouldn't normally support in order to get us there. But I'm not sure that people always make that connection. Not everyone's, hugely politically astute. What do you think? What can the SNP do?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons why people are making that choice. I think one of it is Brexit, and the fact that the party has a very clear position, a very clear Remain position that people can relate to. And I think we saw a bit of that in European elections, albeit it's a lower turnout than normal, but then it usually is a historic poll, but it was quite clear that people were moving to the SNP, and the Labour Party didn't get an MEP, which in personal terms I think was a pity, because I think David Martin was an excellent member of the European Parliament.
And been around a long time.
Yes.
Knew the ropes.
Yes. I think there's a couple of things happening. I was speaking to Brendan O'Hara on Thursday, and he was very much looking forward to the Martin Open. It gives people confidence. I think it gives people confidence when they see a big crowd of similar-minded folk. It gives them a confidence boost. It maintains good morale amongst independence supporters. But one of the things that I'm also picking up was in the referendum in 2014, the schemes were yes, the estates were no. Even in Glasgow, 70% Jordan Hill no, Gorbals 72% yes. I'm getting even in Glasgow South West, I am picking up that the estates are moving towards yes. People who are either now declared yes, or they're moving in that direction. If there was a scale of 1 to 10, they're now 6, 7. Which is probably some of the people that you've identified that you're speaking to. I think that, I also believe that whoever takes over as Prime Minister is going to force us as a party to campaign quite strongly for independence and independence referendum in the next general election. And I don't see it being 2022. For other factors, I don't see it being 2022. And I think that we have to continue to positively engage with people who are thinking about independence, to support the party in each electoral contest, so we can win the referendum.
And where do you think...
And I think that we need to drum it into I was quite clear about this in the lead up to European election with our activists. We need to know, and we need to be very clear that we need to earn a in each and every single electoral contest.
Absolutely.
You have to earn it every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a mistake other parties have made that we can't afford to make.
And what do you think the big questions are going to be this time? Obviously, currency was a huge one last time. So I'm just thinking about the member of my family who said he still had questions, and currency was one of them. What do you think are going to be the things that people are still going to be uncertain about?
Well, I get the impression that the no case will still be the same no case, and I think that's
well, it can't be the same because you can't say
history's like this.
Changed.
Well, the history's like this, and if you listen to people who are advocating against independence, they're still using the same arguments. They use the same arguments in shipyards. Despite all the promises not being fulfilled, they're using all this all the rhetoric about being better together. The irony, of course, is that Scotland wouldn't be in the European Union if it was independent. I think that's canards now being seen through. So we need to encourage and engage positively with electors in Scotland, particularly those who are now thinking about it. And I'm picking up that there's a lot of people in the estates that are now leaning that particular way. And maybe it's just going to be like Scottish history in terms of devolution. The first attempt failed, and the second attempt was a big win, and hopefully that'll take place.
Yeah. Do you think there's any downsides to the marching, to the flag waving?
No, I don't. I think that people on these marches behave impeccably.
The good-natured element of it is in mass contrast to any small unionist.
Well, that's right. That's hardcore,
if you like,
hardline unionism that actually switches people off.
And I suppose it's also fun just waiting to find out just how few people the BBC will say were on the marches.
Well, there's always that guessing, and who's guessing what. Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
I think that there is a formula that you multiply by 2. Plus 10,000, I think is.
Okay, bear that in mind. So obviously one of the earliest slogans that anybody who I'm a lot older than you, Chris, so I can remember it's Scotland's oil, a way back. I can remember the news report watching the very first bits of Scotland, the very first drops of oil come off into a pipeline, and a BBC journalist capturing it in a file. So oil has underpinned SNP policy for a long time. Clearly also, on the other hand, Scotland's trying to lead the way in climate change. So this week we have the incidence of Greenpeace trying to stop an oil rig move to its base in the North Sea. They've been occupying the Cromarty Firth for a few days. The police have moved them on. BP have brought out an injunction against Greenpeace, but Greenpeace say they're going to send one of their boats to make sure that the oil rig doesn't make it to where it needs to be, because we've got to stop producing oil. This is a difficult one, isn't it, for Scotland, because we do know that we need oil to underpin the economy. For how long, perhaps, is the question. We know that if we'd had control of the oil revenues, what a difference that would have made to Scotland had we had a fund like Norway. But I think I'm right in saying that the onshore economy is bigger than the offshore economy, or moving that way, and we are trying to take massive strides in alternative energy. And if we weren't being stymied by things at Westminster, it would be much easier. So what's the appropriate response to this from independent supporting people?
Well, it has to be a careful response. There's also a wider issue, I think, throughout the world and worldwide politics, which probably dominated a lot of what's happened in the Middle East and other parts, about who controls the oil, who has the oil. And I think that's a key issue as well. And the countries will want to have their share of oil to help the economy and to make sure that that's going to good use. It's quite clear that people are very now engaged about climate change. Very real concerns about fracking, for example.
Exactly.
And we're seeing in places like in Texas, where there's now local referenda and local ballots from the population who are now voting to stop fracking because of the effects that is having in their communities. So I think we need to engage with it. And also the fact that because of technology, companies are able to drill deeper into the seabeds as well.
To get to the oil they didn't think they ever could.
But when I was in secondary school, I was told that the oil would run out in the year 2000. We're now 2019, and people think that we can now go on at least another 20, 30 years.
And more oil fields being discovered all the time. But that's still, at what point do we say, well, we can't base an economy on oil production?
Well, you can't base
it's so volatile anyway. I mean, the price falls. If we were talking earlier in the programme about the possibility of more strife in the Gulf, that happens, and that's the oil price gone again.
Yes.
So, so are Greenpeace right to do this?
Well, I wouldn't say whether we're right or wrong. They have a right to protest, and whether that's appropriate or not is for other people to determine. But I think we need to look very carefully about how we're balancing our energy policy arguments. It's quite clear there's a lot of concern about climate change and climate change justice, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But I think we also need to have a think about the oil, where the money's going, because Scotland hasn't seen really any benefit of that. Must be the only country that hasn't.
Indeed.
And also looking at Norway, where the oil funds that Norway has are producing more money from its investments than it is from the money that's coming in from oil.
Exactly, yeah, I know. But I mean, if you think like that, you just go mad really thinking about what could have been. I think my point of view is, yes, absolutely Greenpeace have a right to protest, but I'm worried about the safety element. I mean, people shouldn't be having their lives put at risk at sea, and it could go horribly wrong. And whatever you might think of multinational companies, BP are within their legal rights to do what they're doing. They're not doing anything illegal. They have a right to drill.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's particularly helpful, but I still think it's an issue for Scotland going forward about how we square that circle between wanting to be leaders on climate change technology, and the fact that Scotland's oil has been the thing that was going to underpin the economy. And it's a thing that people will keep coming back to us about. It was the thing after 2014 when the oil price fell. Oh, look what would have happened to the economy if you'd relied on it. So I do think we need to think about
But that's a false argument as well, though. I mean, I think it was Alec Neil once said this in the Scottish Parliament, that You know, an individual wouldn't phone Camelot one week and say that it's 1 to 6 numbers, but I don't want it because the jackpot is volatile. I mean, that's the, you know, it would still be a boost to the country. But we have to make sure that whatever's coming in oil revenues is being vested properly in a future generations fund, so that the legacy of that isn't just felt within the next couple of decades, but is actually felt hundreds of years going forward.
And make sure that there's nothing going to damage the onshore economy. Food and drink, one of the biggest sectors we've got, with Brexit coming down the line, that's going to be damaged in so many ways. Not just the fact that we're not actually going to be able to get some of the damn food out the ground into the marketplace, yes, but actually the protections, I mean the protection against Scotch whisky, for example, with the Americans now ramping up, that they're going to be producing it and we'll be able to call it what the hell they want and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yes.
Talking about not being able to do anything, how frustrated were you this week watching Scotland's women football players with some pretty dodgy decisions by the referee?
Well, yes.
I mean, I hate to do the we was robbed. And actually, fair play.
Well, we were certainly robbed in the Japan game, and that was a penalty.
But fair play
VAR
to the team,
would have showed that was a penalty.
Fair play to the team and fair play to the pundits. They weren't actually, you know, they've not been blaming the ref. They've been taking a kind of slightly different approach. But it was pretty difficult to watch, was it not?
Yes, but I actually am very proud of the Scottish women's team to get to a World Cup final. It's a massive achievement. Still a chance. I think there's still a chance we can qualify.
Well, we were having a discussion about this last night in the pub, and none of us can quite work out how that can be, because even if we win against Argentina, we'll only have 3 points.
Well, other teams in
and the
other
others
groups
have 6 and 4. So
yes, but other teams in other groups, it's like the old World Cup when there was 24 teams. Is that the 4 best third places
could go through.
So
on that basis.
Which
I remember after the first game against England, one of the English commentators, we'd only played one game and lost, again by something that probably shouldn't have been a penalty, but okay, these are the new rules, fair enough, saying, oh well, Scotland could always get through as one of the best third. And I thought, we haven't even played our second game yet, and I was absolutely raving and thinking, we're not going to have to rely on that.
Well, to be fair, I mean,
surely to goodness.
I actually think that one of the things that I like about this World Cup, it's a lot of attacking play. The football, I think the standard of football is very high, and there's a lot of good attacking play. It's not like some of the World Cups that you see in the men's group, with very defensive unit. So I'm actually quite impressed by how we're doing.
I'm going to say you would be impressed, because you're a Partick Thistle supporter, I hear. So you would be
Glasgow's number 1 football team.
Well, you know, see, if everybody in Glasgow who said they supported Partick Thistle actually turned up at the games, you'd have more money than Manchester United, probably.
That's very true. So okay, people should go to the games.
So what's been the highlights of your week this week, Chris? What's really caught your eye in the press? And what's been the best thing? What's the best thing you've heard in?
Well, I tend not to try. Well, I mean, I really don't get the chance to read much of the press. I think that we have, obviously, the Serco issue, because it's a very pertinent issue, constituency-wise, has probably been the main issue. Watching Conservatives conspire in and out of cupboards is amusing, as they try and negotiate this major difficulty they've got. And I think the other highlight was just hearing about how vicious the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting was on Monday, as they try and address their Brexit position, which people believe is not clear. I certainly would support that.
Well, it's not clear.
They don't really have a position.
I mean, Max Hastings might not trust Boris Johnson to tell him if it's Monday or Tuesday. I'd be curious if Jeremy Corbyn knew if it was Monday or Tuesday, quite frankly, or, you know, would change his mind. I mean, I'm right in thinking that it was the Labour abstentions and voting against the bill, or the vote to try and insist that it be a no deal Brexit stopped it.
There was 8 flipped.
That's what.
Well, I mean, there are some people who have not registered their vote can be for various reasons. Could be family reasons. Could be, you know, there's various things about that. I wouldn't necessarily have a go at them. But I think the 8 who voted with the government, if they had kept the line, and if they had kept the whip, the Labour whip, then the government would have been defeated.
Yes. So, but let's say abstentions. Labour are good at abstaining.
Well, they are.
It's a thing. And while I absolutely accept there are genuinely reasons why people sometimes can't vote, I'm often wondering whether actually you shouldn't be allowed to abstain.
Well, I think there's I actually would turn that on its head. The House of Commons has started to introduce proxy voting in some circumstances, and I think we should look at, it shouldn't be a blanket proxy vote, but I think we should look at seeing if we can develop that further, so that we can, so that MPs are given the opportunity to do that.
As part of a major reform of how Westminster operates.
Yes.
And isn't the fact that the building is falling down around your ears a real opportunity to move it out of London?
Well, there is an opportunity for that. The renewal of Parliament bill will be
What's it going to cost
debated.
us again?
Well, I can't remember the billions, but it's billions.
And where are you all going to go?
Well, it looks like we may be going to... I think that's still to be agreed this week as to what's going to happen there. There is an opportunity for it to go around various parts of the UK. I wouldn't necessarily oppose that. But I think that for me, they're asking us to spend billions of pounds to renew a structure which is very elitist and very class
It's
driven.
a metaphor, isn't it, really, for
what's
wrong with
the first thing that hits you when you get there, right between your eyes, you're hit with the class differential, particularly when you're looking at the Tories on the other side, some of whom may then pontificate that there's no poverty in the country, who've never been in a scheme in their lives.
I believe there's someone, I'm not sure who it was, it might have been Ken Clarke, it might have been someone else, who said that if, because Boris Johnson hasn't ruled out, if he does become Prime Minister, that he would shut down Parliament in order to get no deal through, which is what Dominic Raab said he would do. He was going to do a Charles I and just lock it all out, basically.
Well, what happened to him? Yes,
and exactly what happened to him. Boris hasn't ruled that out, though, and I think someone said, it's okay, we'll just simply move across the road to the Methodist halls, which are directly
Well, I think that was Rory Stewart.
Yeah, Rory Stewart said that, and we'll just set up a Parliament in there, and I thought that was quite...
Well, in all seriousness, I mean, there is an issue here of the government controlling the agenda, where they could give us all of the new Prime Minister being posed by about the 24th of July. That's summer recess will then take place just after that.
Yeah.
Parliament's supposed to sit in September for 2 weeks. The government could decide not to do that, and the government could then decide that Parliament doesn't come back till October, and we may be presented with a fait accompli.
Yeah.
So we need to really watch that.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to think very tactically and strategically about how we deal with that situation.
So if you were a betting man, I don't know if you are, what do you think is going to happen? I think it's going to be crash out without a deal, because I think that's always been on the agenda. Do you think that's going to happen? Or
the best advice I can give you...
Parliament are going to be able to flex their muscles one more time?
But what I've said to constituents is you've got better odds putting on your 6 numbers than you have guessing what the final outcome is going to be.
Okay, that's
I think
really
it's really hard to. It's really hard to. Well, I think it's hard. I mean, everybody's guessing, and I think it's hard to.
I mean, it was
hard
tremendously for political geeks like me, people who get excited about politics, and there's not enough of us, in my view. It was tremendously exciting watching Parliament do what they did and try to stop, and all these votes. Just frustrating. You couldn't. You could all agree what you didn't want, but you couldn't hear what you did want.
But that should have happened at the start, because the Leave case never identified what Leave actually meant. It didn't say this is what it would look like.
No.
And that's why the indicative vote should have really happened at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Or Article 50 should have been held back until there was something more than just the back of a fag packet or the side of a bus to present to the British public. But, the best chance of there being no deal was if Labour had supported Joanna Cherry's bill. Is there any chance that will come back?
Well, that's to revoke, you mean?
Yeah.
And remain. Well, that's something that we will continue to argue for, is to remain.
Yeah, because Corbyn said recently, although he may have changed his mind again because it's difficult to keep up and who really has got that kind of energy, that he would back a second referendum with Remain on the ballot. I don't know if that's still his position or if that's still a position of the party. So is that
I think his position in the last I read,
Cherry's bill came back, there would be a
the last I read, his position is that any deal should go to the public.
But that's for a confirmatory.
That does exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily say there should be Remain. So a confirmatory. And to be honest, if people can't be bothered to get off their backsides to vote in the referendum, which is fairly clear in or out, how engaged is the majority of the British public who actually are sickened by the whole thing now? I mean, even people who are, staunch Remainers are going, I just can't take any more of it.
Well, I think the turnout would go up in a second referendum turnout.
A second referendum it would, but not a confirmatory vote of this is the deal, vote for this deal or not a deal. I think people would go, I don't really understand that.
Well, it has to be,
There has to be Remain on the ballot.
You have to vote for this deal to leave, or you're remaining in the European Union. That, to me, is the only sensible choices that could be put to the people.
But people who are talking about conservative votes aren't saying that.
And I think that turnout would be higher on the basis that in 2016, many people didn't think this was a fight. This was our fight. It was seen as this is an internal Tory party squabble fight. Not that this is...
But given how well the Brexit Party did in the European elections, could we be convinced that the result wouldn't be the same? And if it was the same, that would be it, game over. And then what happens if the vote turns and it's 48 to them and 52 to the Remainers? It's like the Canadian never-ending. It could go on and on and on. And also, where's the logic between people
I don't think the Brexit Party did as well as people think. Their results are very similar to UKIP's 5 years ago. And also in relation to that, they're polling around 26% at the moment. Now, the reason they're ahead is because everybody else is performing so poorly.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. It wasn't any higher than, in fact, it might be slightly lower, I think, than the UKIP percentage of the vote. But even so, well, who knows? As you say, if we knew, we would all be millionaires, perhaps. Certainly, none of us are going to be millionaires if Brexit happens.
Yes.
We're all going to be very much poorer, especially those of us living in Scotland. So, thanks very much. I hope the viewers have enjoyed the new format of just the two of us. A word from the producer that producing television programmes is expensive, and to allow Broadcasting Scotland to continue to make programmes and pay the bills and to run this lovely studio, we need more people to sign up as Broadcasting Scotland supporters. £5 a month from each of you would help and go a long way, so please sign up to the website www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register. So thank you very much, Chris. I've enjoyed that immensely.
Thank you.
I hope we've given you something to think about for the rest of Sunday. Apologies for giving the programme its wrong title at the beginning. As I say, it was kind of thrust on me when I walked in that I was going to have to act as obviously chatter and interviewer. It's been a great privilege. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.